So then we'll give it a start. I I see like with the hats on, it feels like being in a virtual web meeting, but just that you cannot switch off your camera, so be aware of what you're doing in the next half an hour. I will see when you fall asleep, for example. Um, yeah, I call this Make Open Source Best Practice Visible for Quality-Driven Regulated Industries. Long title. The basic thing behind is that um, here's a lot of CRA compliance, ASBOMs, we're on the compliance track, but there is a bunch of industries which ask for being compliant to certain standards, some ISO standards, and I'm mainly in the field of safety, so we'll go through this briefly soon. And the idea here is to say, like, can we claim quality management being performed within open source projects? A little disclaimer first. This is a work in progress. It's an initiative of few people meeting every other Friday to just discuss about this thing and drive it, and you'll be directly pushed into the current work in progress. We also always seek for more input, so it's nice to hear from you what you know as frameworks, what you would feel about things, so we come hopefully in a good interactive discussion later on. Let's see how it works with the heads up. I guess will work quite well. You should always get some trust originally in the one and see like who is performing on stage. Just briefly about myself, I'm an OSS community manager within ETAS, focusing also on automotive open source software processes, which basically means bringing open source to the developers, to the company, bringing company process into open source. That's my main working field. This initiative is from the ELISA project, where it's a special interest group. I give you a brief introduction what it is, because Linux Foundation, we're here at Eclipse, so you may not be aware. I'm advisory board member. I commit to the Eclipse ESCO project, and I bring a very long open source history. I think that's my passion, basically. Also my friends and my wife typically will make some fun about me when I come with the next open source idea. Quick thing about ELISA. Who is aware, so raise your hand, who is aware about the difference between safety and security? Hi, half, a bunch, most. Minor recap, as it's also being recorded. I don't know, cannot ask the later on recorded virtual participants. If you see the pictures here, we have the fire escape, which is something which is added for safety, but if you look at the top, there is an open door, so it may not be as secure as you think, because someone can intrude, but at least you can escape in case of emergency. That's about safety. On the other side, you can see you can get your fingers into the door if the door closes. That's something which causes safety issues. It may be an emergency exit, then it's really a safety issue more. But at least there's a strong lock in front, so this is the security thing part, just to have this one set up. And ELISA is about mainly the left side, but the idea about the lighthouse activities we're talking about come a bit from the right side, because in open source and safety, we typically hear, oh, safety and open source cannot go together. It's two different worlds. And if we like turn back the wheel of time 10 years, you may see that people say, well, security can only be done by obscurity, by your own development, but open source cannot be secure. So for this part, we see that this changed until today, and a lot of people explicitly choose open source solutions for being secure, complying with cybersecurity, and know that, okay, if I go to the latest version of some kind of package, so I will most likely be in the latest, most secure version of the software. However, when you come to a product development in regulated industries, they will tell you, oh, is this component certified? Is it compliant to a certain standard? And then there was most likely someone taking the effort for certifying something and making it compliant to a standard, but then cannot keep up with the pace of the development in the open. So then you may be ending up with a security certified library from 5 years ago. I had just this discussion during lunchtime, and where actually the better solution would be the library you take out today, which you basically see in all the cloud infrastructure open source projects do. So it's just like setting up the scene. And in the ELISA project, we are looking basically into having a similar argument. How do we can argue that open source software can be safely used in critical environment? It's a lot about dependability, reliability. We check this for various industries, which also motivate this Lighthouse best practices work group. We work with industrial-grade Linux distributors, which work in all these industries. I give you a very brief picture on like who's involved in there. And we also interact with a bunch of other communities, not just Linux, and we really try to reach out in various fields to get a good background and see that we always think in a systematic context. Right, so this is basically about it. Here's a list of our members, so you can see like top technology companies used to open source, but also industrial, working in industrial fields of regulated parts. And yeah, we just basically 1.5 years ago, we sat together during a workshop in the morning at breakfast. We all stayed in the same hotel, and then we started this discussion, and this was basically where things originally kicked off. Yeah, so basically setting the scene to get you on board. Traditional software development methods, speaking about the V model, are automotive SPICE if you're in automotive, CMMI, very little rigor, ISO 9001. This is like built for proprietary software. It comes from companies, it goes into companies, it's in company development, and well, open source behaves differently. And there is currently no real quality standard I'm aware of. You can correct me, so it would be also a good thing, which is a code-centric standard, which really focuses on modern CI software development practices. And we really know how open source community works, but these are really driven on high quality and high efficiency and high structures, protection, and so on. So this is something which we see, and still we see more and more requests by the regulated industry to handle complex use cases, to go for collaboration, to go into the open, but still there's the lack of matching standards. So we said the goal of the project is to evaluate and document established open source development best practices. There have been also a bunch of presentations around trustable software framework. I mentioned it here briefly, but this is also focusing on a product development, giving you a trustable score. We said we do not write down the things. We want to base on the best practice which we can observe. But we don't want to take this into the blue. So we then want to go for a strategic or systematic approach in going into this. And then come up with a guide that helps you to see how can I rate the quality of something, but that's just the extension of it. The base part is to really write down and to give a proof that what's happening in the open brings a high degree of quality. We have here 3 main phases and pillars. That's where we started last year off, so we were just saying like, what is actually the status quo? How can we define this kind of practices? What do we find as evidence? Who made the little bit of work upfront to us so that we are not reinventing the wheel? And then check that whatever we came up as our assumption is being visible also in certain pilot projects. Then what we added up, we're really at the beginning. I mean, it's already April, but we're not so fast as we could. We hope that for December timeframe, because we know some people from Joint Development Foundation, people who are actually working in ISO standards, that they help us to prepare towards a standard, which could become an ISO something, IEC, SAN, SANALAG, whatever we don't know. Not that we really want it, but we see that in the regulated industries, they want to have a number. If they don't get a number, they are not convinced, right? If it needs 4-digit, if it's just 3, it's most likely not enough. Unless you're in aerospace, then 3 is also a good number. And yeah, therefore we also look into existing standards. Maybe there is someone already working on this. Maybe it's something which is close. We performed some literature and research on this. We checked projects, and during this phase, we had this in the beginning. We gave a review end of the year, last year, and someone said like, well, have you actually checked the others which are doing what you're planning to do? Because there are already a lot of best practices documentations out there. So we added this as an additional pillar, try to bring things together, and at the end up to place it either as a project or bring it to communities and so on. The poor thing about standards actually is like there are already so many standards out there, and well, that's ridiculous. So we need to develop one more universal standard, right, to match them all, so we have another standard in there. That's really like the conflict which we're seeing, that we basically do not want this, but we haven't found something, and how do we deal with it? So we don't take ourselves too much serious, so we have the XKCD here, and I think describes the situation quite well. Where we initially started off, we conducted a survey if there is actually potential interest, and that's also how we found our members of the working group. So we said, like, what is your interest? Which kind of industry are you? Are you aware of open source? Are you aware of standards? What do you bring? We had a presentation on this. This is recorded, so you can later on check the link when the slides are shared and see what people thought about. We collected a bunch of people who said, yes, we are committed to working in this group, and by this we kicked off. Then we said, like, let's do not reinvent the wheel or do not duplicate work. So there was the automotive process thick group within Eclipse. So we invited them. We joined also their meetings so that we really make sure there is a big overlaps or there's no overlaps, right? Depending on that we have synergies, because it's a niche project and a niche topic, so not too many people are in. Yeah, and then we said that we need templating on this to really make a comparison possible. So, and continuously, like today, also challenge the idea. It's good that we have a community base, but we get always the best feedback from these kind of interactions. So we've started with an unconference at ChaosCon at FOSDEM last year. So this was important because they know much about frameworks, community health, metrics, and so on. We went with the Bitergia people checking this to just check, like, is it worth to do the survey? We performed the survey, presented then the concept with the feedback which we got. We brought this into an internal workshop of the project, then brought this up to the Open Source Summit in North America, presenting the feedback and all the results. Made a presentation again during the ELISA workshop, brought this further into Eclipse meetup, so you can see we really try to work cross-organizational, cross-foundational parts. And yeah, we like to go into a little bit of impressions where things are. So first we thought, like, we need some kind of structure. So the structure things comes in with ISO 9001 actually. Why have we selected ISO 9001? We had participants actually from open source companies which doing industrial products, and they said we went with our open source development process into assessments for ISO 9001 as a basic quality standard, and this demands certain clustering, like stakeholder management, risk management, and so we grouped these kind of things and said these are also areas which we want to assess when we look into a project. There's a sheet, and I have the links as well, so you can really browse through the larger spreadsheet, goes through the different parts. So, and this was then at least a category, but the category also need to have items like where do you check against. You cannot simply say, I check against how risk is tracked, but we want to, like, say, what evidence is there? So we looked into the standard. This was the second part where we wanted to look. The three main work items which we took were a review paper from P. Bernson on evaluation of open source OS for critical safety critical applications. So this was a thesis. Sorry. The second one is systematic review. The systematic review I really recommend. It's not 100% up to date, so read it with a little grain of salt and a bit of care, because it speaks, for example, that before you would test anything in the open, you would basically do a review. And if I look into current practices, of course, you would most likely run your CI/CD pipeline first with the linting and all the things before you take the first serious look into a pull requester. So a little bit things changed in there, but it gives you a good hint, and it even tells you, because it goes along a traditional V model also, it gives you an idea on what could be a requirement when it comes to open source project, what could be an architecture, what kind of testing is done, how can a project create traceability. And these are all things which standards later on will ask for, but things may look different in open source. And then on a latest one was also touch more on security as well, is the thesis from Stefan Tachner, and this gives you just a little more up-to-date 2025 perspective, but more also security safety parts together. And we used all this and filled up our Excel sheet again with more and more of these kind of fields. And basically all said like we need a matrix. We look on the one side on the process, and we look on the other side on the evidence of what has been performed. And the evidence is also there to see like on what we believe are certain practices. And yeah, this is a matrix. So where we basically say like process robustness, is there somewhere something defined? This is the first thing. There could be nothing defined. It could be implicitly defined that there are certain rules set that you need to follow. It could be explicitly defined with contributing guides or so. Institutionalized by really doing hard checks and other parts and having systematized things where you do a governance in the project, where you are talking like how to change processes, how you add things, why you add new things, get this really in there. So this would be like being excellent. And then we have the evidence, and we say like there's nothing, a little bit like which ratings are so going on. And then we try to find each of the parts as evidence, really, with putting in links. We know the links can break, but it's basically for others to follow up. So, and then we also go through iterations, look like where can things go. We also will extend this by the pre-existing frameworks. That's the new item which we work on. And to show you also the these two dimensions in practice, this is a recent achievement. We started basically with a symmetric drawing. So like red part no was in the horizontal line and in the first column. And then the second column and second row was limited. And also established was third, sophisticated was fourth, and so on. So it was really a symmetric picture. And while discussing this, we saw like, well, wait. Not everything of this makes sense, because it will be much better, and our assumption is that evidence is higher rated than a process. A process is worth nothing if nobody follows the process. You can write down the most beautiful process, so if you don't have evidence, then it doesn't work out. So, and therefore we gave a little shift and said like, let's bring up here, see. Yeah, so we see here this gets this move a little bit down to the left, and here are some scaling lines. This basically tells us you can already have something on a sophisticated rating because you have things explicitly defined, writing it down, but really enforce it by tools. This is like a rating which you can get. But some parts are not even possible. Like if you have nothing defined, it's nowhere defined, you cannot actually have a governance model. How will you have a governance model, write down minutes and document your decisions? So you need to have something evidence, and it need to be some more sophisticated thing. In same part also, well, you have no evidence on the process, but you really have a systematic way on doing things. I think there's so many things in the Linux kernel, for example, how they really handle patches and so on. You will get a lot of feedback, so they have systematized things, and maintainers work on this, work according to it. So there is at least a minimal evidence needed. So it's not that there is no evidence, it's just not properly documented. And that's how we came to it and really went through all the cells and came into a very good discussion to say like, that's where we want to go. And this would be later on for you when you go in an assessment, you can also make sure, oh wait, here's something I haven't understood also. This ends up in this beautiful spreadsheet again, where you really go first on the left side with the areas. This is from the ISO 9001 that you can have grouping and mapping. The aspects are taken from the various standards or the various literature part, and then you do a subjective rating originally, right? So this is basically that you define it, and it's of course gets better over time. And it's currently completely manual work, and it's quite some effort to fill this kind of thing. However, we are also in the initial phase want to make sure that the left, so the second column B, where we are going through the different aspects, that these are really valid. And one best practices, which the people write down, and you're here and you know this, SBOMs are best practices, right? So check the kernel, Linux kernel, which is used almost everywhere. It brings a certain set of quality, and see where the Linux kernel provide the recent CycloneDX, AspDX ready SBOM download in their daily CI builds. You most likely fail. And we actually ended up with some of the project where we went into exchange because we cannot find always all information. So went in the community, and I don't name it, I don't want to blame a project, but there was one project which basically said like, what actually is an SBOM? On the other side, I mean, if you have a small project which has a limited amount of code, basically has one license, does a versioning, does regular releases, how complex will this SBOM of this similar library will be, right? It's most likely so simplified that you can say, well, you may have an SBOM, but it's not in an SBOM form as you expect. And you may even trace your vulnerabilities and everything and have this listed in your release notes or so. So you do not require the need of an SBOM and don't need to touch, like, well, everybody talks about CRA, but go to the open source people 2 years back, nobody knows what the CRA thing is. It just came into open source like out of the sudden. So for this, we went through the Zen project for a little bit. We went through Yocto project, and always here it's a subjective first rating for us. So when you read it with care, and you can come to a different conclusion. You can also let us know. We will extend, for example, with curl most likely, because curl is also a very nice example with so many deployments, so many downloads, different structures. So there need to be some kind of quality and like a kind of a little bit of dictatorship with the mono a maintainer in there. So we want to check through these parts and go on with this. And yeah, here you can basically see like the rating 314, color coded, reworking this continuously. Then the latest part was on existing records of best practices. So we'll continue, and this is really something which will pop up in the next month. So we will get the first evaluation and the first feedback in June. We again go for a workshop from the project, and then bring it most likely in September, October frame to an open source summit, wherever we go, to a conference where we can challenge this in a wider audience. And yeah, we will look into scorecards, insights, trustable framework, which is in the Eclipse. I know that the Eclipse people would like to see Eclipse up front. I missed this. Sorry, it's Eclipse trustable. Case community. We'll go to Dawn Foster, I guess. Exchange with her again. And it would also be nice. Show list soon. So if you come up with new ideas, it's a little bit wider than you may expect. So here you see we have, of course, our activity, right? This is one of them. But we found OpenSSF already brings like 3 different kind of judgment criteria for best practices. Chaos has evidence on forest or dashboards and so on. There's an insights tool. There's the batch. I think I haven't mentioned them because I couldn't find the real evidence on the process, but there are the Eclipse maturity badges as well. Apache brings it, CNCF brings it. The to-do group has guidelines on how to do open source properly. So we really would like to see this. And yeah, we figured out that when we look into this, we have actually no clue on what it is meant for. Who's the target group of this? What's the effort to perform it? Is it complete? And that's basically where we now look. And so we group them, we cluster them into different things, like is it meant more only for security? How much is the scope of it? Where does it go to? We'll sort this out and then shortlist, and we'll most likely say, like, based on this, we have evaluated this is a reason for going forward or not, and then looking very much into details. We definitely will know that we will look into the scorecard from OpenSSF, and we will also build something on the LFX insights, because we tackled this already at end of last year. And while we were sit there, suddenly a new, not so often joining community member showed up and she said, like, you know, what about standardization parts, which also deal with these kind of things? So you see on the right side, there's the NIST part, AMITAC, which is like on marine software quality, which is specific, but this is something which we missed in our standards check and so on, and we don't know. It's more like the stretch part of it. It's not exact like open source best practice, but we at least want to assess as far as we can, if it's available in the open, how does it fit? And then like how close the connection is, you can see with OpenChain, right? OpenChain also brings in certain things you should do. And this also gets into an ISO standard. So an ISO standard, IC standard is not always completely disconnected from an open source environment. So we will look into this as well. And all this, which I've shown, basically is targeted to be processed in 2 working drafts with the links here. So you can either see this comparison, which is super early draft, and you can see also the practices, a little bit of the ratings. Everybody should have read access. I'm not sure about commenting, but whenever you go on this and say like request commenting rights access, it typically takes most likely a day or so when I check again, and then I give access for editing or commenting at least. So this there, and if you get other issues, you can also approach directly. The idea is, yeah, I also like to get more participants in there. We have a core group of 4 to 5 people working on this. We have an extended group of 8 to 10 people joining the calls. There's minutes of everything there, and to get involved, it's every other Friday, 12 p.m. so noon time on UTC, so this universal time. We have the mailing list. The mailing list is mainly there to announce the meeting agenda and make sure that the meeting happens. Sometimes there is some exchange, but we have more like ad hoc exchange on Discord. And yeah, you can see also read the wiki, and actually the main repo is not too populated because we have still a lot of work in progress. We consider to get in a landscape that we can also see like which project has been assessed and so on. If you actively want to contribute, there's an in-person workshop in London happening, June 9th to 11th. It's free of charge, but you really need to later on confirm because we have limited slot. It's workshop, it's really interactive, it's much more topics around safety and other parts, and there's also virtual participation possible if enough people mark their interest in virtual because it's never as good. Registration is open. And your ads are targeted to have the discussion to get feedback and potentially get also enough time for the next speaker to speak up. I'm already at the thank you part because, well, I hope for discussion, I hope it will work out with the headsets. So if someone would make this proposal like this would be a good framework, this is something you missed, have you considered that? This would be really kind of you, or just ask questions like whatever you have in mind. So, anyone comes up with some question?
Any question? We have time. If not, thanks very much, Philipp,
Yep.
for the presentation.